Hey there, you magnificent bastards. Welcome back to Skepticus, the only place where we ask the really uncomfortable questions, usually while sipping something strong and trying not to offend too many deities. Well, maybe. And okay, maybe it's not the only place asking really uncomfortable questions, but I'm kind of feeling myself today, so what the hell? If you've been following or subscribing, you might have noticed that this morning I posted a video that's a response to Frank Turek's hate-filled rant about the LGBT community and apparently how he thinks that they should judge everyone all the time because that's what Christian love is all about. But it got me to thinking about how Christianity and monotheism in general creates a type of ingrained exclusionary system. You see, if you are a Christian or a member of any monotheistic religion, but seeing as how I live in the American South, I'm going to keep this mostly about Christians. Have you ever stopped to think about how your beliefs, whatever they may be, actually shape the way that you see the rest of the world? I mean, really dig into it. Because today we're going to be poking a bit of a sleeping bear, maybe even a fire-breathing one if the ancient texts are to be believed. As I said, we're going to be digging into Christianity, and before anyone grabs their pitchforks or starts firing off emails in all caps, just hear me out on this one for a second. This is not a hate fest. This is more of an observation, a slightly irreverent, hopefully thought-provoking observation about something that's kind of baked right into the very foundations of the faith itself. Something that, if you squint at it just the right way, can look a little like, well, bigotry. Now, I know that's a spicy word. Bigotry. It conjures up images of hate rallies and discriminatory laws, and while those things are certainly fueled by it, bigotry can also be a little more subtle, a little more default. And that's where I want to start our little exploration today. Think back to a time before everyone and their dog, literally, maybe, was claiming allegiance to one God and one God only. Imagine a world filled with pantheons, with local deities looking after specific rivers or forests, with a whole celestial bureaucracy of divine beings. Cultures like the Romans, for instance. They had their own gods, sure, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, etc., all the usual suspects. But when they encountered other cultures with their own set of deities, well, they didn't necessarily say, your gods are all fake. Often, they just sort of incorporate them. Oh, you worship a sky god named Thor. That's interesting. Our Jupiter handles the thunder. Maybe they're just different flavors of the same cosmic thing. It was kind of like a divine potluck, everyone bringing their own dish to the celestial table. Now, there were practical aspects to this, of course. A lot of this was about keeping the conquered populations in line. And if you want to keep those conquered populations as docile as possible, it's probably not a good idea to tell them that you are disavowing all of their pre-existing gods. But whether it was for political gain or whether it was just a matter of being sort of open-minded, cultures like the Romans, specifically cultures that relied on polytheistic beliefs, weren't so fast just to throw everyone else's beliefs out the window. But then comes along this new kid on the block, monotheism. Kind of sounds like some disease you get in school, but we'll leave that one alone. One God to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them. Sounds pretty epic, eh? Like the ultimate power move in the deity department. But here's the rub. If you're saying that there's only one God, what does that inherently imply about all the other gods people are worshiping? We'll get to that uncomfortable conclusion in just a minute, trust me. It involves a lot less divine potluck and a lot more cosmic smackdown. So you've got these early monotheists, the folks laying the groundwork for what would become Christianity and, of course, Judaism and Islam, for that matter. And they weren't just saying, hey, we think our God is the real deal, or we think he's superior. They were going a step further, actually a really large step further. They were saying that everyone else's gods? Nada. Zilch. Non-existent. Not just wrong, not just inferior, mind you, but utterly and completely fake. Now, let me give you a personal anecdote here. I used to run a business. We had offices in the US and in India. I had a business partner, wonderful gentleman. He is Belgian. He's a Christian, and he's a big fan of Freemasonry. He's been a Freemason his entire life, and he just gets a lot of value from it. And being European, he told me one day, we were having a discussion. He said, you know, when we talk to Americans, there's Freemasonry in America, of course, but he said often Americans have a much greater aversion to Freemasonry, and he couldn't figure out why. And I chuckled, and I said, George, I can tell you exactly why. Because the people that don't want to hear about Freemasonry in the U.S. are almost certainly Christian. They're probably evangelical Christian, and they see Freemasonry as some kind of insidious plot from the devil. Now, George, being this wonderful, open-minded guy, didn't understand this. He said, how can that be? Because when you go into the Freemason Lodge, there is this podium up there, and they make you take an oath when you first join. And they say in the oath that you have to believe in some higher being. They don't say which one. They don't nail you down. They just say you're supposed to believe in some higher being. And they have on the podium a Talmud and a Bible and a Quran. And poor George, he's so naive in a wonderful way. He said, how could this be a problem for Christians? We're accepting. We say that you have to believe in a God. We allow all religious thinkers to come and be members. But I said, that's just it, George. For many Christians, especially American Christians, especially American evangelical Christians, it's not enough to say that you believe in a God. You have to affirm their God. It's not enough to say that you like the Bible or that you believe in the Christian God. You have to say that all the other gods are false. And the fact that you have a Bible on the same table with a Quran, on the same table with a Talmud, for many Christians, again, especially American evangelical Christians, they find that to be offensive because it's not enough for them to have their faith affirmed. You have to also trash everyone else's faith. Imagine that you're a painter. Let's say that you're an impressionist painter, happily dabbing away at your water lilies. And you meet a cubist painter who doesn't just prefer sharp angles and fragmented perspectives. He tells you that Impressionism isn't just not as good as Cubism. He tells you that Impressionism isn't even real art. Your beautiful, light-filled canvases, they're illusions, they're deceptions. And to top it all off, he hints that your dedication to these flimsy impressionistic techniques might just land you in some serious artistic hot water somewhere down the line. How would that make you feel? Would you suddenly see the genius of all those Picasso portraits? Probably not. You'd likely think that this person was a bit of a, well, you can fill in the blank. And you sure as hell wouldn't be excited to go adopting his form of painting after he's basically insulted yours and told you that it's non-existent. And this is where the inherent exclusion of monotheism starts to feel a little prickly. It's not enough to say, we believe this. It often comes with the not so subtle or sometimes very blatant message that everyone who believes something different is, at best, misguided. And at worst, they're heading straight for the fiery furnace of eternal torment. Now, speaking of fiery furnaces, that's where this thing gets even less cozy. It's one thing to say that someone's God is fake. It's another thing entirely to tell them that because of this mistake, they are destined for eternal conscious torment. Think about that for a second. You've lived your whole life, followed the traditions that you were raised in, worshipped the deity or deities that your culture revered, maybe even lived a pretty decent life by most metrics. And then, bam, surprise, your deeply held beliefs weren't just incorrect. They've earned you a one-way ticket to unending eternal agony. Does that sound fair? Does that sound like the behavior of a loving, all-forgiving deity? Or does it sound more like the ultimate cosmic punishment for not subscribing to the right brand of belief? Now, we'll unpack that moral quandary a bit later, especially when we delve into the Old Testament's rather enthusiastic approach to divine justice. But let's just say that Yahweh isn't exactly known for his gentle diplomacy. But this isn't just about abstract theological disagreements. This exclusionary nature of Christianity has real-world consequences. If you genuinely believe that anyone outside your faith is not only wrong, but also doomed to hell, how does that shape your interactions with them? Does it foster understanding and empathy? Or does it create a divide, an us versus them mentality where the them are seen as inherently flawed, their beliefs a dangerous delusion? I'll let you ponder that one while we take a little detour into the rather colorful history of the Christian God. Now, we can't talk about potential bigotry without digging into the source material, right? When you crack open the Old Testament, you find a deity who, well, let's just say that he had some very specific preferences and he wasn't afraid to play favorites. And when I say play favorites, I mean on a national, even genocidal scale. Yahweh's relationship with the Israelites is, let's just say, intense. It's like that friend who's fiercely loyal to their inner circle but couldn't care less about anyone else. Except, in this case, the friend is an all-powerful being with the ability to unleash plagues, part seas, and command armies. And he wasn't exactly shy about using those powers on behalf of his chosen people, often at the expense of, well, pretty much everyone else. But it goes deeper than that. There's also the wonderful issue of multi-generational curses. Yeah, Yahweh is a big fan of those. The idea that the sins of the father and mothers, although they often get less blame in these stories, that they could be visited upon their descendants for generations. And that's directly from the top, from the big guy. It's a concept that flies in the face of pretty much any modern understanding of justice and individual responsibility. But hey, who are we to question divine judgment, right? Especially when that judgment conveniently falls upon your enemies. And speaking of enemies, the Old Testament is rife with examples of Yahweh explicitly endorsing, even commanding some pretty horrific acts against non-Hebrew populations. Genocide? Check. Slavery? Absolutely, with detailed instructions on how to properly own another human being, including how to beat them. Forced sexual servitude? Sadly, that makes an appearance too. The justification? These people weren't part of the chosen tribe. They worshipped the wrong gods, who, remember, according to the core tenets of the faith, didn't actually exist anyway. But even though they were worshiping supposedly gods that don't even exist, they were still going to be brutally punished for worshiping these imaginary gods. So apparently, they were just in the way. They were collateral damage in Yahweh's grand plan. Now, the standard Christian response to these uncomfortable passages is often a bit of a rhetorical tap dance. They might say that it was a different time, that God's ways are mysterious, or that these stories are meant to be interpreted allegorically. Except, of course, when they're used to justify their own moral stances on issues, and then they're supposed to be taken hyper-literally. But the fact remains that these stories are there in their holy book, depicting their God as explicitly favoring one group and sanctioning violence and oppression against others simply based on their ethnicity or religious affiliation. And here, back to the central point, is where the potential for modern-day bigotry truly creeps in. If your own deity, the ultimate moral authority in your worldview, is portrayed as engaging in this kind of tribalism and violence, doesn't that inadvertently create a framework for justifying similar us versus them thinking in the present day? It becomes awfully easy for unscrupulous leaders to demonize any group that they don't like, to paint them as the modern-day equivalent of the Canaanites or the Philistines, the outsiders deserving of God's and therefore apparently our wrath. The groundwork for exclusion and prejudice is just kind of baked in right into the divine narrative itself. Think about it. If God himself drew such stark lines between the in-group and the out-group, isn't it tempting for believers to do the exact same thing? To see the world through a similar lens of divine favor and disfavor? It's a powerful and potentially dangerous framework. Now, at the risk of sounding a little vindicated, I have to admit that I've watched the reaction of certain segments of Christianity to the LGBTQIA plus rights movement over the past couple of decades with a certain grim fascination. Because on this particular issue, a lot of the usual theological tap dancing becomes considerably more difficult. For so many other morally dubious aspects of Christian history, there are well-worn talking points that are designed to smooth over the rough edges. The Bible endorses slavery? No, no, no. Christians were the ones who ended slavery, which is a highly selective and historically inaccurate claim, but hey, it's out there. Yahweh ordered genocide? Well, that was in the Old Testament, and Jesus preached peace and love, conveniently ignoring the fire and brimstone that Jesus also seemed to be quite fond of. But hey, who's keeping track? The church has a long history of misogyny? Well, you're just misinterpreting the texts. Husbands are commanded to love their wives, while wives are commanded to obey their husbands, but I guess let's not get bogged down in the details. But when it comes to the issue of homosexuality and LGBTQIA plus rights in general, the escape routes become considerably narrower. Sure, there are increasingly progressive denominations and congregations who have chosen to embrace and affirm the LGBTQIA plus community, and that's a wonderful thing. But there are still vast numbers of churches, influential Christian leaders, and entire denominations who have vehemently rejected gay rights, often citing specific passages in the Bible as their justification. And here's the kicker. Their scripture, taken literally, does in fact seem to support them in this. Those Old Testament condemnations of abominations and the New Testament passages that seem to frown upon same-sex relations are pretty explicit, at least on the surface. So while they might try to soften the rhetoric with talk of loving the sinner, hating the sin, the underlying message remains. These desires, these identities are inherently wrong in the eyes of their God. People who are born this way are inherently wrong in the eyes of the creature or the deity that created them. Think about the logical contortion here. If God is the one who created every human being with all of their inherent desires and inclinations, he counted all the hairs on your head, then why would he create an entire group of people with same-sex attractions only to condemn them for acting on those very desires. It's like building a car with a steering wheel and then telling the driver that they're going to hell if they try to make a turn. It doesn't exactly scream divine plan, now does it? It sounds more like, well, bigotry, dressed up in fancy theological language. And the consequences of this theological stance are very real and very tangible. It's not just about denying gay couples the right to marry or adopt. It fuels discrimination in housing, employment, and healthcare. It leads to the ostracization of LGBTQIA+ individuals from their families and communities. And tragically, it contributes to a climate of fear and self-loathing that has devastating mental health consequences. All because a group of people are daring to love and build lives with others of the same sex. A fundamental aspect of the human experience that, in a more inclusive worldview, would simply be accepted and even celebrated. It's also worth noting how incredibly easy it is to discriminate against those whose experiences you've never even shared. It's easy to cast judgment on gay people when you've never felt a flicker of same-sex attraction yourself, or if you have and it embarrassed you and you've been beating it into the closet ever since. It's easy to tell followers of other religions that they're doomed when you've been raised from birth in a deeply Christian environment, never truly questioning the foundations of your own faith. It's easy to act like a righteously indignant, well, when your holy book provides you with ample examples of your own deity behaving in ways that, if a human did them, we'd certainly condemn. Ultimately, this isn't about saying that every Christian is a bigot. That's a lazy and inaccurate generalization. There are countless Christians who are deeply compassionate, inclusive, and actively working to combat prejudice in all of its forms. But the inherent structure of the faith itself, its claim to exclusive truth, and the often troubling portrayals of its deity in Scripture create a fertile ground for exclusionary thinking and, at its worst, outright bigotry. So the next time that you encounter someone who not only believes that they have the one true faith, but also seems awfully keen to tell you why your beliefs are wrong and potentially damnable, maybe take a step back and consider the roots of that conviction. Consider the inherent bias that is baked into a system that claims exclusive access to divine truth. And maybe, just maybe, suggest that they take a moment to reflect on whether their certainty is truly a sign of divine favor or simply a consequence of a worldview that by its very nature struggles to see the validity and worth in anything outside of its own tightly drawn lines. It's a conversation that's worth having, even if it's a little uncomfortable. Because understanding the potential for exclusion and prejudice within any belief system, including Christianity, is the first step towards building a more inclusive and compassionate world. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, the divine potluck isn't entirely off the table after all. We'll save that theological debate for another time, though. For now, keep questioning, keep thinking, and as always, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.